And it's frozen.
In the box.
Okay, there we go. Right. Everybody back?
Yep.
There we go. Right. Iris, over to you.
Jacob leaves his hometown of Beersheba and journeys to Haran. On the way, he encounters the place and sleeps there, dreaming of a ladder connecting heaven and earth, with angels climbing and descending on it. God appears and promises that the land upon which he lies will be given to his descendants. In the morning, Jacob raises a stone on which he laid his head as an altar and monument, pledging that it will be made the house of God. In Haran, Jacob stays with and works for his uncle Laban, tending Laban's sheep. Laban agrees to give him his younger daughter, Rachel, whom Jacob loves, in marriage in return for 7 years' labor. But on the wedding night, Laban gives him his elder daughter, Leah, instead, a deception Jacob discovers only in the morning. Jacob marries Rachel too a week later, after agreeing to work another 7 years for Laban.
Right. Oh, sorry. Should be another page. Yeah, here we go.
Leah gives birth to 6 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun, and a daughter, Dinah, while Rachel remains barren. Rachel gives Jacob her handmaid, Bilhah, as a wife to bear children in her stead, and 2 more sons, Dan and Naphtali, are born. Leah does the same with her handmaid, Zilpah, who gives birth to Gad and Asher. Finally, Rachel's prayers are answered, and she gives birth to Joseph. Jacob has now been in Haran for 14 years and wishes to return home, but Laban persuades him to remain, now offering him sheep in return for his labor. Jacob prospers despite Laban's repeated attempts to swindle him. After 6 years, Jacob leaves Haran in stealth, fearing that Laban would prevent him from leaving with the family and property for which he labored. Laban pursues Jacob, but is warned by God in a dream not to harm him. Laban and Jacob make a pact on Mount Gal-ed, attested to by a pile of stones, and Jacob proceeds to the Holy Land, where he is met by angels.
Okay. So that's what's happening this week, Cedra. Quite a lot going on. We're going to have a look at the birth of anti-Semitism, very topical subject. Who is the archetypal anti-Semite in the Torah?
Pharaoh.
Haman?
Pharaoh, right? He says, you know, they're going to grow more numerous than us. There's the whole thing with it says the new Pharaoh ascended that didn't recognize Joseph and his achievements, and the commentaries say, was it a new Pharaoh? Was it the same one that basically turned his back on the Jewish people? Okay, but actually, there's somebody worse than that, and he's in this week's Edge, it's Lavan. Let's see why. So we'll start with a quote from the Haggadah. Who'd like to read?
I'll read if you like.
One.
Go and learn what Laban the Aramean sought to do to our father Jacob. Pharaoh made his decree only about the males, whereas Laban sought to destroy everything.
Right. Sorry, not Armenian. That's quite cute. Aramean. Aram, it seems, is Syria.
Okay. Sorry.
No, it's all right. So it was also in the news this week. So this is from the Haggadah, right? Teulamad, go and learn what Lavan sought to do to Jacob. Pharaoh, for all of his cruelty, sought only to kill the males, whereas Lavan sought to destroy everything. Like, what's that about? Hard to understand. It comes from the following quote. Who would like to read? No, it's frozen. Never mind. The next one. This is a quote from Devarim. This is where the quote comes from in the Haggadah. Who'd like to read?
I'll read that.
Tom?
So then recite as follows before your God. My father was a fugitive Arabian. Yes. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there. But there he became a great and very populous nation.
Right. So go learn what Lavan sought to do to Jacob. sorry, this is in the Haggadah, it continues to say, Shenema, as it says, Arami Oved Avi, Vayir Mitzrayim, and it quotes all this in the Haggadah, right? This is part of the declaration he was supposed to make on the Bikurim, the first fruits, before the Lord. Vanisav Amarta, you shall answer over your first fruits in the temple as follows. My father was a wandering, a fugitive. I love that translation. Aramean. So the assumption is that was Jacob, who escaped to Aram, which was also Haran, where Lavan lived. Or it could have been Avram, who left Aram when God called on him to go to Canaan. So nowhere does it say Lavan tried to destroy my father. Number one. Number two, we don't find that in the Parsha. He was definitely a trickster and a fraudster. He deceived Yaakov. He exploited him. He chased him when he fled. But there's no suggestion anywhere that he tried to kill him. In fact, what happens to Lavan? God comes to him in a dream. Oh, sorry, it keeps changing. Who would like to read number 4?
I will.
No.
I'll just say that our internet keeps coming and going, so apologies
Okay.
if you don't hear
You're fine
me.
at the moment. You're fine at the moment.
Okay. But Hashem appeared to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream by night and said to him, beware of attempting with Jacob, good or bad.
So Hashem warns him, leave Jacob alone, basically. Right? And when Lavan complains that Yaakov is trying to escape, right? Look at the time frame of all of this. By the end of the Sedra, when he finally wants to leave, Rachel's just had Joseph. So that means he's got 12 sons. It's over a period of a number of years, at least 20 years. Yeah? That's an awfully long time. And when he tries to leave, what does Yaakov say? What does he say? This is what Yaakov says to Lavan. Go on. Who wants to read? Julian, do you want to read?
He's not there yet.
Oh, Anna, do you want to read?
I'll read. 20 years now I have worked for you in your estate, 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for some of your flocks. You changed my wages 10 times.
Right. No suggestion he's trying to kill him. Right? He's definitely take advantage of him, treating him like a slave, conning him into working as an unpaid laborer in return for his daughter's hand in marriage. But no suggestion he's trying to kill him. Now, also, what's the Haggadah about? It's about how the Egyptians enslaved us and practiced. 1 second. Close it. Guys, keep closed the door. It's too noisy. They practiced, something you hear about quite a lot nowadays, actual genocide, right? They slowly destroyed the Israelites, and Hashem saved them from slavery and death. And Pharaoh was the bad guy in all of that. Why would you deflect from that by saying, well, Pharaoh wasn't so bad, Lavan was worse? Doesn't make any sense either as the central theme of the Haggadah, and also it doesn't fit in with any of the biblical text. When in Devarim it says that you should say Arami Oved Avi, that my father was enslaved by an Aramean. Was a wandering Aramean. No, it says also that he was a slave. That's what he was. He was taken advantage of. It's not the same as being killed. So what's going on? So maybe the answer is that Lavan's behavior is a paradigm, unfortunately, for anti-Semitism throughout the ages. It's not so much what he did, but it's the scene that he set. Let's see how. He starts off as a friend, right? He even says to Yaakov, Yaakov, why does Yaakov go to Lavan in the first place? Because his mother says, go to my brother. By the way, we're not really supposed to say things like this. It's considered a bit kind of heretical, but it's interesting how you see things run in families, right? That whatever the reasons for it, the fact is that Rivka had no problem deceiving her husband, right? It may have been for the best of reasons. And surprise, surprise, her brother's also a deceitful person. It's interesting, isn't it?
How she was brought up, probably.
Yes, absolutely. So she sends Yaakov to Lavan for his own protection from Esav. And Lavan says, I'll protect you. And then what happens, of course, it turns out that he's acting on self-interest, right? Jacob works for 7 years for Rachel. That's a lot of years. Then on the wedding night, he substitutes Leah. And then He doesn't say you can have both of them. He says you'll work another 7 years. Finally, when all these children, and Yosef is born, Yaakov tries to leave, and even then Lavan protests, and Yaakov works another 6 years. And what happens then? Lavan's sons go on. Iris, we're up to you, I think.
Oh, now he heard the things that Laban's sons were saying. Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from that which was our father's, he has built up all this wealth.
They take our jobs. They take all our money. Yeah, familiar refrain from xenophobes and the far right and anti-Semites. Yeah, and anti-foreigners generally. Look, this usurper, as far as we're concerned, all he's doing is he's working blooming hard, basically. He's a hard worker. Yeah, despite the adversity and the cruelty and the trickery of his father-in-law, he works hard. He rolls up his sleeves for 20 years. And all Lavan's sons say is, look at this guy, he's just taken everything from us. Lavan himself becomes hostile. Right? And what do his daughters have to say? Even his daughters get fed up. Rachel and Leah, they say, he treats us like strangers. He's sold us and he's spent the money. Right? He's got no regard for us. He treats us like property, like, we're not supposed to do that nowadays. And also, I don't have the quote here, but Yaakov sees that Lavan's not being as friendly as he was, that things are deteriorating. Finally, he says, what does Lavan say to him when Yaakov says, give me my payment for all my work for you, and give me my wives and daughters and sons, sorry, and I want to leave, right? And what does he say back to him? Julian, are you with us yet? I can't see you.
No,
Julian?
he's
Whoops.
not. I'll read.
I'm gone. Sorry, it keeps changing.
Oh, hang on.
Yeah.
Oh, is that right now?
Laban, yeah.
Yeah. Then Laban spoke up and said to Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks.
Right. Everything you have
All
is
that you see is mine. Yet what can I do? Hang on. Yet what can I do now about my daughters or the children they have borne?
It sounds like a bit of a lament, right? What can I do? But nonetheless, what does he say? It's all mine. You've got my flocks. They're my daughters. They're my grandchildren. I didn't give you anything. You're my property. You're my slave. You have no rights. You have no existence. You married my daughters, but they really belong to me. I agreed to give you animals as wages, but no, they're all my flocks. So he's basically in denial. And what happens throughout all of this, right? Every time that Lavan pulls a fast one, what does Yaakov do? He responds with dignity. He doesn't stoop to his level. He works another 7 years. He works another 6 years. Finally, when he's hemmed in, he says, I want to leave. That's when it all kicks off. In the end, of course, he does leave, but that's not the point. Lavan is very reluctant to let him leave. So we look throughout history. What's this got to do with history? How many times throughout history were we successful in a society, productive citizens, and not only did our hosts often turn on us, but they used it against us. They enslaved us, they denied us our rights, and they turned against us and said, you're taking all our money, you're too successful, you're bleeding us dry. Yes? Your flocks are my flocks. Everything you see is mine. You took it. It doesn't matter that often in society Jews had contributed to national prosperity. They'd been productive citizens. People were very quick to turn on them. Look at Germany, look at Egypt, right? Look at societies today, unfortunately. I don't know if this is a fair comment. I was talking to Josh, and no, they went to Poland recently. I said, I went to Poland in 1994, I think, from school. And it may have improved now, but when we went, the hotels were like 5-star tourist hotels, but everything else was like something from the 1950s. It was all old cars and rundown houses and poor public transport, and just everything felt like you were frozen in time 20, 30 years earlier. Probably not unlike Russia. Now, it could be it's changed now, I don't know. But I just remember thinking, this is a pretty godforsaken place. It's a pretty backward place. It may have changed now, I don't know, but it certainly felt pretty backward at the time. I just remember thinking, this is a country that had 1.5 million Jews. I think, no, more, 2 million, was it? Something like that. Was it 2 million, 1.5 million Jews? And virtually all murdered or deported. Now, can you imagine what kind of a thriving country and society could have had with 1.5 million Jewish citizens who typically are professionals and contribute to society and are generally law-abiding, build communities and uphold family values, and you got rid of them, so you reap what you sow. But unfortunately, that's been the story throughout time. So Lavan has this problem, right? He turns around to him and says, "You've taken everything of mine. You've built everything on my back. You've got no right to any of it. You're a foreign usurper and you have no right to it whatsoever. It's mine, 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 mine." Right? It happened after Joseph's death in Egypt. They're very quick to forget. It happened throughout history, unfortunately, in so many different empires. Right? I mean, the ultimate irony, of course, was with money changers. The Jews were money lenders because Christians were forbidden from doing it. But then, of course, everyone turned on the Jews. So they have all the money and they're the bankers. Yes, well, you gave it to them because you wanted them to do it. So thanks to Rabbi Sachs. There's someone called Amy Chua. I don't know how you pronounce it. Chua. Anyone heard of her?
No.
I Googled her. She's a professor at Harvard. She's also written some books. Obviously of Asian origin originally. And she wrote a book called World on Fire. So she argues in this book that ethnic hatred will always be directed by a host society against a conspicuous, successful minority. So what are the requirements for basically ethnic hatred? Let's have a look at what she says. Who wants to read? Julian, you here yet?
No.
No.
Group
Iris, I think we're back to you.
The hated group must be a minority or people will fear to attack it. It must be successful or people will not envy it, merely feel contempt for it. It must be conspicuous or people will not notice it.
Right? So you don't generally find that kind of hate to the majority. It's always a minority, even if it's a large minority. It's a successful minority and it's one that's conspicuous, that stands out. And that has almost always defined the Jewish community, right? We are conspicuous. We dress differently. We are proud of the way we dress and we are openly Jewish. We are generally successful and we're in a minority. You could say that for other groups as well. You look throughout history. The LA riots, if anyone recalls, it was blacks attacking Koreans. What was the problem? The Koreans were hardworking and generally successful, law-abiding, and there was envy. It was pure, plain and simple. Why one ethnic group has been more successful than others. It's the same idea. So that was Lavan's problem with Yaakov. He was a minority and he was successful.
Laban's family wasn't very nice altogether, really, was it?
I mean, instead, it doesn't sound like they did much work. They just expected Yaakov to do all the work for them, It's a bit like, if you've had like a manager that's managed your plant or your farm for, 50 years, and then you make them redundant because your son wants to take over and they get no credit for what they did. That's Yaakov, basically, right? He was the one that put all the effort in. He was the expert at animal husbandry, as they call it. No, he was the expert herdsman. He doesn't really get the credit. But if you read the Parsha, he only gets the credit because he basically comes up with this scheme to have all the spotty cows, and he manages to contrive that the cows have lots of spotty cows. But Lavan, given the choice, would have not rewarded him at all. So why in the Haggadah do we say that an Aramean sought to destroy our father, and it was Lavan? What did Lavan do? So it's this jealousy and this accusation and this othering, they call it nowadays, that Pharaoh was a one-time thing. It was awful. Tried to drown us, right? But Lavan, unfortunately, this jealousy, this singling out of us as a minority, this envy of our success, and attacking. What does Haman say? Haman says there's the people who are mafuzam ufarad bein ha'amen, who are spread amongst the nations, who have different customs and practices, right? They're different. They're conspicuous, right? And guess what? What's the most conspicuous country in the Middle East? Israel. Why? Because it's
So, what did Laban follow? I mean,
no, I assume he was some kind of a pagan because
sent him there because
I
she
guess
didn't want
he
him
was,
to marry an idol worshipper. So what
yeah,
did he worship?
I assume he was some kind of a pagan, to be honest.
So he didn't follow Abraham.
He had some household gods because Rachel.
Yes, of course. In a few weeks' time, she's going to steal them. That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was a pagan. or
And I
something.
mean, this shows what a family they were like. Rebecca was brought up with Laban's with
Yeah.
the same family with
Yeah.
Laban. She
Yeah.
deceived her husband.
Yeah, yeah,
Jacob went along with it. Laban deceived Jacob over Rachel and Leah,
yeah.
and then Rachel deceived her brother about the gods. She said she hid
Oh,
them.
okay.
She sat on them
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
hid them from him.
yeah.
So it was a family based on deception all the time, wasn't it?
Interesting point. Yeah. See, you look at William and Harry, but this is families. Families are complicated things. You hear nowadays about a family where it's very tense because one person became more religious and one person's less religious, and this one's telling that one what to do. And but I look what was going on here. This is his own uncle, his wife's father.
I don't
And
think
his
Rachel
uncle-
kind of had very
his
much.
uncle
respect
noch
for
as
her
well.
gods.
They're mishpocha. I guess people married first cousins in those days. I've just realized they were first cousins, right? His mother's brother is the one causing him all this pain. Wicked uncle. So
I don't think Rachel had much respect for her gods for the idols because she sat on them. That
Yes.
doesn't show much respect, does it?
No, not at all. And that she was trying to presumably destroy them or take them away. So Israel today, it's conspicuous because it's different. It's the only democracy. It's the only Jewish country in the Middle East. It is successful in many, many ways. And it is a minority. It's a Jewish state in a sea of Arab states. And guess what? Victim of a huge amount of envy and anger. I saw a few postings on Facebook, people putting things like, on one site said, do you think the Lebanon ceasefire is a good thing? And all these extremists saying, no, it's not a good thing. I have to finish off and destroy Israel. And people are saying, you people are so backward. Like you're just basically going to spend the rest of your lives like in one war after another, and there's never any reprieve for you. When do you ever become a civilized society? I mean, people writing that are probably far right people, but it's interesting. And actually, some Muslims had replied saying, what's wrong with you people? Like, when are you going to get into the 21st century and stop having such a backward mindset that there's nothing productive in it. Israel's a tiny country with few natural resources. It's outshone its neighbors, has a higher GDP, it has higher, better healthcare and education and moral morality and what have you. It's the same thing. So then you've got Yaakov also is symbolic, as Lavan is symbolic of envy and pointing the finger and accusations by his children that Yaakov stole all their, took all their family money. Then Yaakov comes to represent something as well. He stands for the little guy, the minority, the small nation who refuses to let themselves be crushed. So there's a whole paradigm here. So in the Haggadah, when of course we talk about Pharaoh and what he sought to do. But when we say go and learn from what Lavan sought to do to Yaakov, Pharaoh made his decree about the males, but Lavan sought to destroy everything. Why? Because it's this kind of thing, this kind of attitude and this kind of demonization that basically lands us in trouble. Is a physical threat dangerous? Of course it is. Of course it is. At least when Pharaoh's coming, he's going to drown you. When Lavan's coming, you don't know if he's a friend or a foe. Familiar story? People who we think are our friends or allies turn out to be two-faced, and then most unlikely allies emerge. Right? Story of kind of, Israeli society and history. So it's more insidious. It's even more insidious. And it's very frightening. And we see it in every generation. This is what our God is warning us. So, you can't win. It's yeah. Accused of controlling things, of being too successful, right? You're too successful. Sorry. I once had a call many years ago from someone who was working. Well, this would be an interesting question nowadays, but at the time I thought it was rather strange. They look at minorities, ethnic minorities, and we are an ethnic minority officially, and whether they're disadvantaged when it comes to higher education. So at the time, it was when I was in Cardiff, and I thought about the community and all the kids that go to university and have access to higher education. I thought, I think a disproportionate number do go. It's extremely unlikely that we're disadvantaged in this area. I would say I would think differently nowadays because places of higher education are hostile to Jewish students, unfortunately. But putting that to one side, in terms of going to university, yes, probably a much higher rate. We're not a disadvantaged minority in that sense. And one of the reasons is that we've never felt sorry for ourselves. We just get on with it. People make comments which sound very intolerant. I don't like the way they say it sometimes, but just purely as an observation, when our grandparents came over here 100 years ago, no one put signs up in Yiddish. You had to learn English. No one got interpreters. When you went into hospital, you didn't get a leaflet in 20 languages. You had to learn English. That was the reality. No, I'm not saying it's a terrible thing that we're more understanding of different cultures and people that come over here. We make things available in the native languages. It does create a culture where people never learn the native culture, and it's a problem. It's completely different. We never had that. We just had to learn the hard way. Many Jewish families, the last generation or this generation, the first generation to go to university. Previous generations didn't. They were blue-collar workers or they were immigrants and they had to work with their hands, and we've always just done that. We get on with it, whatever the challenges. Let's see what Rabbi Sachs has to say on this. It's another short share, actually. We'll start making it a bit longer. I'll read Rabbi Sachs. One sec. Lost it. Okay. So, Jacob stands for minorities and small nations everywhere. Jacob is the refusal to let the large powers crush the few, the weak, the refugee. Jacob refuses to define himself as a slave, as someone else's property. He maintains his inner dignity and freedom. He contributes to others' prosperity, but he defeats every attempt to be exploited. Jacob is the voice that says, I too am human. I too have rights. I too am free. If Lavan is the eternal paradigm of hatred, of conspicuous success in minorities, then Yaakov is the eternal paradigm of the human capacity to survive the hatred of others. In this strange way, Jacob becomes the voice of hope in the conversation of humankind, living proof that hate never wins the final victory, freedom does. And it's just interesting to note the response of, I didn't actually know until this week, that there are actually at least seven rabbis in the UAE. There's a few people doing kashrut, and there's people teaching, and there's quite an established community. I mean, there's more rabbis in the UAE than in Woodford. And what was their collective response to the murder of Rabbi Kogan? So obviously the response was that those who have the power will have to make sure to, protect us physically. But the spiritual response was that we will come back even stronger. We will not be deterred. We won't be chased away. And we will, I don't remember the quote I saw, but it said, whatever we did until now, we'll double it. We'll show them, sort of thing. And that's always been the Jewish way. We always respond with light. We always respond with success. We build. We don't destroy. That's always been the Jewish way. That's the Yaakov. That's the response, is to succeed. When I lived in New York, I once walked into our bank, and there was an African-American bank manager. I think she was the manager. It said manager on her desk. She had a big sign on her desk. The best cure for racism is excellence. Now you could turn around and say, that's not fair. Why should you have to excel just because you're from a minority? You could say, I think that's something we embrace. That's something we believe. We will succeed despite the challenges. We'll show her that we won't be deterred. That's always been the Jewish way. And that starts all the way back to our forefather Jacob. There we go.
No.
Right. That's the end of today's share, actually. Any questions or comments? Or
as Jeff said, it hasn't helped, has it?
Hasn't helped, but perhaps if we understand it and we see, look, it's not only with Jews, we see it with other minorities, that when anyone is successful, there's there's resentment. Even just this whole thing, they take all our jobs. We have immigrants take the jobs that natives don't want to do. It'd be like going to Israel. You see lots, probably fewer now, but you see lots of Palestinian workers say, oh, why can't they employ Israeli workers? They don't want to do these jobs. They feel it's beneath them. All these jobs that Eastern Europeans are doing, you British people, native Brits, don't want to do them. I look at, in our kids' school, there's a guy called Florin. I don't know where he's from originally. It's somewhere in Eastern Europe. He's like the building manager. Known him for 9 years now. When I first met him, he has a family with young children. He was going to college in the evening somewhere in Ilford. He was working during the day in the school. He had another job somewhere as a security guard. What an example of somebody who is incredibly productive, who's working hard, and that's the kind of thing people are shouting about. They take our jobs. You know why? Because people prepared to work hard. They're prepared to put in the effort, and other people don't want to do that. It's much easier to cry foul. And you know what? So-called British people probably don't want to do those jobs. And you have hard-working.
Is there animosity towards the very successful Asian people? I mean, they work extremely hard. I don't know if it's the same animosity towards them than it is towards Jews.
I think, isn't that basic traditional British racism? I mean, there's less of it than there used to be, also because we live in a much more diverse society. So we've had Asian prime ministers and things. But is there low-level racism? I would think so. Comments and insinuations. If you don't think there is, by the way, spend 5 minutes on Twitter and just look every time there's a post about when Rishi Sunak was prime minister, the amount of racial hatred was disgusting.
Terrible.
So I think the answer to that is, yeah, people will always hate on minorities, but we've been particularly unfortunate throughout the ages. Maybe because we've always have been generally conspicuous, successful, and yes, we've been a minority. Anyway, that's Rabbi Sachs's suggestion. Why in the Haggadah we don't just talk about Pharaoh, who's our physical enemy, we talk about Lavan as well, this much more insidious, much more subtle attempts to undermine us. Okay, right.
Thank you. I'll see you Thursday.
Sorry?
Thursday,
Yes. Thursday, come and hear the Chief Rabbi. If you haven't booked in, please book in for security. If you need to know how to do that, let me know. And just a date for your diary, the 11th of December, which I think is a Wednesday.
Yes.
We've got our at home before Hanukkah, and that's gonna be at Martin and Lydia's house.
Yes.
7
There's nothing on the website. You don't have to book in for that.
You don't need to book. No.
Oh, lovely. Okay. But
Right.
yes, will you post the address?
I will put it. I'll put it on the group shortly. Actually, I'll put the flyer
Lovely.
up.
Okay.
It's on Facebook, isn't it?
Probably.
It is, yeah.
I'll put it on the
Lena
WhatsApp.
posted.
I'll
I
do it.
saw it, so
I'll do it now before I forget. Actually,
Yeah. We have been there before, but just to remind the number.
no, I'll put it there now. It's a good idea.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good week, everybody.
Okay.
yes, same to you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.